A young royal slipped on a sheer Tyrolean cliff, hundreds of meters above the valley floor, with no rope, no path, and nowhere left to climb. The people below watched him cling to the stone, knowing they were about to witness his death. But when they returned the next morning, he was gone. And when he reappeared, he was unharmed, rested, and he claimed he had not been alone. Welcome to Of Mountains and Men, where we explore mysteries, myths, and legends from the Alps and beyond. Tonight, we explore how one of Tyrol's most striking cliffs became linked to a miracle, and why the survival of a single young nobleman would later shape how a future emperor was remembered. High above Innsbruck, where the Nordkette rises almost vertically from the Inn Valley, stands the Martinswand, a pale wall of limestone, steep, exposed, unforgiving. Even today, climbers treat it with respect. In the late 15th century, it was known less for climbing than for hunting. These slopes were royal hunting grounds, and few were more passionate about the hunt than Archduke Maximilian of Austria. Young, ambitious, restless. Later, history would know him as Kaiser Maximilian I. But on that spring morning, he was only a young nobleman, eager to prove himself. When a chamois burst from the forest and fled upward into the rock, Maximilian followed. Higher, steeper, until the path narrowed into nothing. And suddenly, there was nowhere left to go. He stood, trapped on a narrow ledge, the cliff falling away beneath his feet. Below him, his hunting party froze. They could see him, but they could not reach him. No rope was long enough. No route was safe. As the daylight faded, they made the only choice they could. They went to Innsbruck to fetch help, leaving their lord alone on the wall. And so, night fell on the Martinswand. Wind moved through the rock. Cold crept into his limbs, and exhaustion slowly replaced fear. It was then, legend says, that he saw a boy. A peasant child stood nearby on a stone, alone, alive, unharmed. Impossible. Maximilian called out, "Boy, how did you come here?" Show me the way." The child did not answer. He only smiled and motioned for Maximilian to follow. Desperation overcame any doubt. The young Archduke followed the boy across the rock, along ledges he had not seen, across passages he could not explain, until they reached a small cave set into the cliff. Sheltered from the wind, hidden from the drop. There, fear finally released him. He took a deep breath, and Maximilian slept. When the morning came, the rescue party returned with ropes and men. They called his name, and from the cliff face, Maximilian emerged. Alive, uninjured, rested. The boy was gone. There were no footprints, no visible path, no explanation. Maximilian believed his rescue had not been human. In gratitude, he ordered a cross to be placed on the Martinswand. The ledge where he had been stranded became known as the Kaiser Maximilian Gedenkstätte, a memorial standing the test of time until today, still bearing his name. Maximilian was born in 1459. He became Holy Roman Emperor in 1508. And he ruled at a time when power was inseparable from belief. Early written sources suggest that the Martinswand incident happened in his youth, sometime in the 1480s, when he was still Archduke of Austria and often resided in Tyrol. That part is plausible. He was a devoted hunter. He spent long periods in Innsbruck. And the Martinswand was indeed part of the royal hunting grounds. The stranding itself may well have happened, but the mysterious boy, the guiding figure, those belong to legend. And this is where the story becomes even more revealing. Because Maximilian was not only a ruler, he was one of the first European leaders to consciously shape how history would remember him. He sponsored books, prints, family trees, heroic epics, and symbolic imagery. PR, if you will. He understood that stories could rule where armies could not. The Martinswand legend does something powerful. It does not merely say he survived. It suggests he was chosen, protected, saved by divine will. In an age where kings ruled by God's favor, such a story was worth more than any fortress. Some historians see this legend as an early example of political myth-making. A real incident transformed into a miracle. A moment of helplessness reshaped into proof of destiny. And even today, a cross still stands on the Martinswand. Hikers pass beneath it. Climbers move along the wall. And few who look up realize that they are standing below a place where history, fear, and belief fused into a story that outlived the man himself. Some legends are born from terror, some from gratitude, and some from the need to believe their place in the world is decided by divine intervention. High on the Martinswand, where the stone falls into air, a moment of human helplessness became a story of heavenly presence for centuries to come. On certain mornings at the Achensee, when the water lies perfectly still, people claim they see shapes below the surface. Dark lines, angles, a suggestion of rooftops. And before storms, fishermen still speak of a sound rising from the depths. Not waves, but bells, as if something beneath the lake is still trying to mark the passing of time. Welcome to Of Mountains and Men, where we explore mysteries, myths, and legends from the Alps and beyond. Tonight, we explore how Austria's largest alpine lake became linked to a vanished village, and why the deepest waters often carry the heaviest stories. Lake Achensee lies high between the Karwendel and the Rofan mountains. Long, cold, and extraordinarily deep. In places, its waters descend more than 130 meters into darkness. Even today, when clouds drift across its surface, the lake can seem less like water and more like a vast opening in the earth. For centuries, people living around its shores have said the same thing. But the Achensee did not always look as it does now, and that something once stood where the water now lies. Long ago, on the southern edge of what is now the lake, there stood a flourishing village. It lay in a gentle hollow, protected from the winds, close enough to the forests for timber, and close enough to the slopes for pasture. The people there were known far and wide, not for their kindness, not for their faith, but for their abundance. It was said gold clinked in every purse, the barns overflowed with grain, that even children played with toys spun from silver thread. But where wealth gathered, pride followed. No beggar dared knock on their doors. No traveler could rest in their inns without paying far beyond the usual price. Even the priest, once a humble man of faith, now wore robes threaded with gold and lifted his goblet higher than his prayers. One evening, as the village prepared for a great harvest festival, an old woman in tattered grey came limping into the square. Her back was bent, her hands trembled. She asked only for a piece of bread and a place to rest for the night. "Move along, hag," said the butcher's wife, waving her away. "We have no time for beggars." The farmer turned his face. "This is no place for the likes of you. We've earned our blessings." The woman looked around the square. Then she turned toward the glowing tower of the church and slowly climbed its steps. The priest stood in the doorway, goblet in hand. "God helps those who help themselves," he said coldly, and shut the door. The woman gave a single nod. That night, the music rose louder than ever. Torches burned, wine spilled across the stones. Laughter echoed through the hollow. Then came the sound. First, a low murmur, like a distant thunder beneath the ground. Then, a crack that split the celebration in half. The earth trembled. From the mountains, water burst forth. Black, roaring, relentless. It rushed into the hollow, swallowed the fields, tore through the streets, and rose around the church tower. Within minutes, the village was gone. And when the dawn came, where golden spires had stood, only still, shimmering water remained. They say that on certain days, when mist clings to the surface, you can still glimpse the shadows of rooftops below. That before storms, church bells can be heard from beneath the lake. And that once every 100 years, a golden goblet rises to the surface, only to vanish again with the ripples. There is no historical record of a real submerged settlement beneath the Achensee. No archaeological evidence of a drowned village has ever been found. But the lake itself gives rise to such stories. The Achensee is the deepest lake in Tyrol, and one of the deepest in the Alps. In some places, its waters plunge over 130 meters. Long before modern measurements, such depths were unimaginable. Dark water without visible bottom invited explanation. It invited stories. For centuries, large parts of the land around the Achensee belonged to the Benedictine monastery of Ficht, founded in the 12th century. The monastery controlled forests, fisheries, and farmland. Its presence shaped the economy of the entire region. Some historians believe that legends like the sunken village reflect not only religious morality, but also the quiet tension between wealthy landowners and ordinary people, between abundance and resentment, between power and dependence. Across the Alps and throughout Europe, sunken village legends appear wherever deep lakes exist. Almost always, they speak of pride, refusal, punishment. They transform natural features into moral landscapes. The lake becomes not just water, but a lesson. A warning held in place by stone. Even today, when storms gather over the Achensee, the surface darkens almost to black. And in those moments, it becomes easier to understand why people once believed something was still there. Some legends are built from what we lose, others from what we fear, and some from what lies too deep to measure. At the Achensee, water replaced a village that never was. But the story remains, floating between reflection and imagination, as deep and as still as the lake itself. You say that once, in one of the richest towns Europe had ever known, 2 bells were cast entirely from silver. Not bronze, not iron, silver. And yet today, those bells no longer ring. Because something happened in Schwaz. Something that the townspeople never saw coming. Welcome to Of Mountains and Men, where we explore mysteries, myths, and legends from the Alps and beyond. Tonight, we explore how one of Tyrol's wealthiest towns rose from a quiet valley, and how its silver voice was finally lost. High above the town of Schwaz, on the Alpine meadows near Kugelmoos, a young herding maid named Gertrud watched over her cattle as she did every day. The sun was already sinking behind the mountains when her herd's bull, usually calm and gentle, suddenly began to bellow. It struck the earth with its hoofs, tearing at the soil, tossing moss and stone into the air. Was ist denn los? Gertrud murmured. What's the matter with you? But the animal would not be calmed. Again and again, it drove its horns into the ground, until suddenly, beneath the torn earth, something shimmered. Gertrud knelt. She brushed away the soil. The stones beneath were strangely heavy, They gleamed with pale blue and silvery veins. That evening, she carried them down into the valley and brought them to a local smith. He turned one slowly in the firelight. Then his face changed. "Gertrud," he whispered, "you have found silver." News spread quickly, then faster, then uncontrollably. Within months, miners poured into the hills above Schwaz. Shafts were sunk, tunnels driven deep into the mountain. The sound of iron filled the valleys, picks striking stone, carts groaning through the darkness, winches turning day and night. What had been a quiet market town became one of the greatest mining centers Europe had ever known. They said the mountains bled silver. And with silver came splendor. New houses rose, churches expanded, walls were painted, altars gilded. Merchants arrived from Augsburg and beyond. Amongst them, agents of the Fugger family, financiers of the emperors. Silver from Schwaz would soon fund armies, crowns, and courts. And so, the people of Schwaz ordered something no town had ever dared to cast. 2 church bells, not from bronze, but from their own silver. When the bells were raised into the tower, the whole town gathered below. "They will ring for God's glory," the mayor proclaimed, "and for the prosperity of Schwaz. They will never fall silent." When they rang for the first time, people said the sound was unlike any other. Brighter, clearer, almost alive. But prosperity has a way of changing its servants. The deeper the miners dug, the harsher the work became. The demands grew. So did the danger. Cave-ins, bad air, exhaustion. Lives were lost in the dark. Dig deeper, the merchants urged. Faster. The silver will not wait. And slowly, the veins began to thin. It was said the harder they drove the mountain, the less it gave in return. One winter night, a violent storm swept across the valley. Lightning broke over the hills. Wind howled through the streets like a warning. The next morning, the townspeople gathered below the church tower, and they stopped. No bell had called them to prayer. "The bells," someone whispered. "They did not ring." When they were examined, cracks were found along the rims. Perhaps lightning had struck them. Perhaps frost had weakened the metal. Or perhaps, as some murmured, the mountain had simply reclaimed its silver. They will never ring again, the church warden said. And indeed, they never did. In the years that followed, attempts were made to repair both bells and mines alike. Neither returned to their former glory. The silver faded, the miners left. The town grew quiet. And above Schwaz, in a silent tower, the silver bells remained, present but voiceless. Even today, Schwaz still bears the marks of what it once was. In the late 15th and 16th centuries, this town became one of the most important silver mining centers in all of Europe. At its height, more than 10,000 miners worked beneath these mountains. The wealth drawn from Schwaz helped finance Emperor Maximilian I, whose court was based in Innsbruck, and whose ambitions stretched across a continent. Contemporary records describe silver so abundant that it transformed a small Tyrolean settlement into a global economic force. But history also records something else. The mines did not last. By the late 16th century, their richest veins were exhausted. Production declined. The boom ended. What remained were empty tunnels and the memory of a town that once rang with silver. The legend of silver bells echoes this reality. A community that rose faster than any before it. A wealth that seemed inexhaustible. And a silence that followed when the mountain could give no more. They say that if you walk through Schwaz at dawn, when the streets are empty and the mountains still hold the night, you can almost imagine what it once sounded like. Not just iron and stone, but silver in the air. And if the bells no longer ring, perhaps that is their final lesson. That even the richest voice will fall silent when it forgets to listen to the mountain that gave it life. High above Innsbruck stands a Renaissance castle built for splendor. Los Ambras. A place of music, gardens, and learning. But hidden within its walls is a quieter story. One of a woman who was never meant to be there. A marriage that was never meant to exist. And a duchess history almost forgot. Welcome to Of Mountains and Men, where we explore mysteries, myths, and legends from the Alps and beyond. Tonight, we explore one of Tyrol's most unusual love stories, and how a merchant's daughter became a secret duchess in a world that did not allow such unions. In the 16th century, Tyrol was ruled by the Habsburgs, a dynasty famous not for romance, but for strategy. Let others wage war, you happy Austria, marry. It was not a joke. Marriage was power. Bloodlines were treaties. And love had little place in either. Which is why, when Archduke Ferdinand II of Tyrol fell in love with a young woman from Augsburg, the problem was not whether she loved him back, but whether such a love could exist at all. Her name was Philippine Welser. She was born in 1527 into one of Augsburg's wealthiest merchant families. She was educated, well-connected, and by all accounts, unusually intelligent. But she was not noble. And for an Habsburg Archduke, that made her impossible. Ferdinand loved her anyway, against tradition, against political sense, and against the rules of his own house. In 1557, the two married in secret. No court, no ceremony, no public record. For years, even members of the imperial family were unaware that the ruler of Tyrol already had a wife. To protect her, Ferdinand brought Philippine to Schloss Ambras, just above Innsbruck, a castle that would become her world. But Philippine did not live as a hidden ornament. She transformed Ambras into a center of Renaissance culture. She supported music, collected books, encouraged the arts and sciences. She corresponded widely. And she practiced something unusual for women of her station. She studied medicine. Philippine became known for her knowledge of herbs, remedies, and healing practices. She treated the sick, prepared medicines, and earned genuine affection among the local population. Not as a distant noblewoman, but as someone who helped. One of her more peculiar contributions still exists today. She ordered the construction of a luxurious bath at Schloss Ambras, a tiled room with running water, a space dedicated to cleanliness, comfort, and health. In an age where illness was often blamed on bad air or imbalanced humors, such attention to hygiene was rare. Some even mocked it. But it reflected Philippine's modern thinking. Her wish to build not only a beautiful home, but a healthy one. And yet, despite this quiet influence, a darker story later attached itself to her name. According to some legends, Philippine did not die peacefully. It is said she was murdered in her bath. Some whispered of an assassin sent by political enemies. Others spoke of jealousy within the court. Blood in the water. A life taken where she sought comfort. It is a story often repeated in Innsbruck, but is not the story history tells. Philippine Welser was very real. Her marriage to Ferdinand was morganatic, a union between unequal ranks. Their children were excluded from succession. They would never inherit the Habsburg crown. Even so, Ferdinand ensured they were well provided for. And eventually, Emperor Ferdinand I privately approved the marriage. Philippine was granted noble status and the title Margravine of Burgos. She lived openly as Ferdinand's wife, and she died in 1580 at the age of 52. Historical records describe her cause of death as illness, most likely cancer. She was buried with honor in the Imperial Court Church in Innsbruck, beside her husband, not in secrecy, but in recognition. So where does the murder story come from? Like many legends, it may reflect something else. The unease surrounding a woman across class boundaries. The discomfort of a love story that did not follow dynastic logic. The fascination with a woman who lived inside power, but was not born into it. Romantic legends often gather where social rules are broken. They transform quiet realities into dramatic endings. They give stories to emotions that history cannot record. And in Philippine's case, the legend did what politics once tried to undo. It made her unforgettable. Even today, Schloss Amras still stands above Innsbruck. Its gardens are open, its chambers preserved. And among its rooms, Philippine's bath remains. A silent space, once built for comfort, later filled with rumor, now held between love, memory, and imagination. Some stories survive because they are frightening, others because they are strange, and some because they offer something rarer. A reminder that even in a world of bloodlines and crowns, love sometimes still found a way in. Philippine Welser was never meant to be a duchess, and yet she became one. Not through war, not through lineage, but through devotion. And a life lived quietly inside history's walls.
In the Alps, Christmas did not arrive loudly. It came quietly, with snow settling on roofs, with candles lit behind shuttered windows, with silence that felt almost protective. Winter was long, food was measured, and survival depended not on celebration, but on endurance. And so, where fear and judgment ruled the dark nights, another presence was believed to walk, unseen, unheard, and gentle. Where Krampus frightened and Pächter judged, the Christkinder remained. It did not punish, it did not test, it did not announce itself. The Christkinder was never meant to be seen. In Alpine villages, children were told that gifts did not come from hands they could recognize. Doors were closed, a bell rang once, and when families returned, the room had changed. Small gifts lay beneath the tree: apples, nuts, carved wooden toys. Nothing extravagant, nothing wasteful. Because Christmas was not about abundance, it was about reassurance. But the Christkinder stayed. It reminded people that surviving winter was already an achievement, and that kindness did not need spectacle to matter. The Christkinder tradition developed in German-speaking Europe during the Reformation, promoted as a gentle alternative to earlier gift-bringers. But in the Alps, the idea blended naturally with older beliefs: household spirits, protective presences, quiet guardians of the home. Unlike Santa Claus, the Christkinder remained deliberately unseen. Mystery was preserved, excess was discouraged. Especially in Austria, Christkinder traditions still shape Christmas markets, gift-giving customs, and storytelling. Even today, the emphasis remains on atmosphere rather than spectacle. In the Alps, Christmas was not a promise of abundance, it was a pause. A reminder that the warmth, care, and restraint were enough to carry people through the dark.